Hello one, hello all, it's the most button-up ghost of them all, Caspa in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Nas-Magic 3! Nas is a legendary Queens rapper, and this is the third installment and final installment of the Magic trilogy, with of course Nas on vocals, Hit-Boy on production, and they have culminated into an excellent team while putting out a very excellent run of albums when it comes to the KD series. Production was fiery, it was soulful, it was full of life. Nas dropping excellent verses full of introspection, great hooks, and on the third one really holding his own when it comes to not having any features. Like on Illmatic he had like one feature, but on this one he had like no features whatsoever and was able to put out a great project in the midst of that. Now, the Magic series I'm not too crazy about. I don't hate it, but I just think it's kind of okay. Mostly due to the lead-up vibe I'm getting with a lot of these tracks. And now we have the third one, and I feel it just led to another album of unfinished ideas, half-baked ideas, but there are highlights too that I do think pan out well. I would say that the opener to this starts off strong with these vintage organ chops, dramatic string samples, vintage melodies, and a chest percussion at the end in reference to Wolf on Wall Street with the anthemic humming with the as Nas is celebrating his growth and celebrating his life and leaving his 40s and transitioning into his 50s, as he shares his successes, his accolades, and what brought him here today in a very celebratory fashion. And just doing what Nas does best is reflecting on his past and doing it in a very interesting and uplifting way. Next we have Tisk, and while I admire the beat switch at the back end, I think lyrically or attitude-wise, Nas really starts showing his age here, which he does a lot on this album, and not in a relevant, youthful soul way. No, in more of a out-of-touch old head way, which unfortunately rears its ugly old head in quite a few tracks here. Like, it just gives that pompous old head back in my day mentality with a handful of cliches, like if it quacks it's a duck, and then adding like an echo after he says the cliche, just trying to make it more dramatic and meaningful than it is. I do, however, enjoy Superhero Status with this pounding, thundering beat, anthemic vocal samples, and epic introductory like horns, like I'm watching a 70s superhero cartoon show, with these whooshing, soaring through the air like sounds that really adds to the superhero theme, the narrative, discussing how he's like a hero to the environment, and also pointing out how there are rappers who are talented, have something interesting to say, and provide great music, but unfortunately fly under the radar and don't really get the attention they deserve, which I totally agree with. That's why I started this channel. But I also love the modern day hero premise, especially bars like Superhero Status, no masks, no gadget, send them villains at us, we ain't scared of action, we ain't characters capping, but also on the back end showing the reference of being involved in the New York Stock Exchange, and then saying here's my costume change, to pretty much showing how he can be a businessman but also a rapper, and then fitting it into the context of the superhero narrative. After this though, things do start to take a dip. The song I Love This Feeling, while I do respect the sentiment and I do enjoy the bumping bass and the soul sample, I think the hook is haphazardly put together and the odd pacing kind of ruins the enjoyment for me. And No Tears, while I do respect the motivation, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that or reflecting on overcoming hard times. I do think this comes off as a bad self-affirmation recording set to a overly dramatic and cheesy score of a bad 90s movie that went straight to VHS. The song Never Die, we get a fiery and solid hook from Nas on here. He sounds so full of passion, very momentous, but the Lil Wayne feature, while not terrible, I think kneecaps the momentum this track had. While I don't think it's terrible verse, I just think it's kind of okay. I think the bars could have been tighter. I think the passion and vocal variation would have been better. While not a terrible verse, I think it could have been better. Maybe more vocal variation, maybe some stronger punchlines. It just sounds kind of phoned in, honestly. And there's Pretty Young Girl, which definitely triggers a eye roll and a lot of cringe, not only due to how creepy that sounds for a man in his 50s to have a song called Pretty Young Girl and also put that in there. Not only is the premise concerning, but also very condescending too. Like, oh, let me see if she's smart based on the music she listens to. And when you do that, I mean, also it does come off predatorial. And while I don't see a problem with age gaps, just as long as it's consensual, I don't think Nas is acting in the best of faith here, unfortunately. Luckily though, things do pick up on the back-to-back tracks based on true events, while Nas reflects on the late rapper Half a Mill, as he shares the good times they had, the successes they've had, and not really coming off as a mourning song, but more of a celebration of his life. And also the production I find kind of uplifting, and also sharing the same sentiments for Havoc's brother, who unfortunately passed away. So while it does involve mourning, and reflecting on their passing, there's definitely an uplifting, inspirational vibe to this. And then there's part 2, which is the total opposite of uplifting, with this eerie, dark crime drama-like production, where Nas does a play-by-play of a crime rivalry, with a lot of themes of paranoia, with a lot of themes of vindication, and really showing off his narrative storytelling chops as we've loved Nas to do. But not to spoil it, but it definitely doesn't come off as a happy ending, unfortunately. Sitting with my thoughts, while again, not really a bad premise, but definitely a very underwhelming vocal performance from Nas, and the production's kind of a snooze as well. And there's also Blue Bentley, where Nas shows he's definitely even more out of touch on here, with this out of touch lingo, and the production has like this farty, I can't tell if it's a vocal sample or horn, that has these dumb monolithic views on dating women that you would find on one of these toxic manosphere videos, which unfortunately rolls into Jodeci member as he's just saying like, oh, men aren't supposed to show emotion, men are supposed to stay strong, bleh. Which honestly is just really disappointing that Nas has gone this way, but he's never been a perfect person. In my opinion, he's just always been someone who's been a creative poet and very introspective, and I admire that about him. I admire his passion, but I gotta call out BS when I hear it. The song Speechless 2, however, I think is great. I think the production has these jovial woodwinds that you would find on a classic Kanye West track, with these blissful falsetto samples, bright organs, as Nas shares again his triumphs, what he's learned in his upbringing, and also a very valid criticism to AI, saying how it will replicate but never capture the essence that the real artist could bring, which honestly is a breath of fresh air due to the immensely disappointing feedback on the support for AI that unfortunately a lot of legends were backing. So hearing this from a legend like Nas himself is very refreshing. We then get Japanese Soul Bar, which I think could have been a great track where Nas is paying homage to the founders of the culture, the producers of the culture, but then we get this very abrupt clip of him coming up in the game. I think if we had more structure, then this could have been okay, but it just feels like it just kind of ends pretty quickly. And then we end things off where Nas is going over his successes within the trilogy and pretty much doing a victory lap here as he brings up the mindset going into King's Disease and Magic, and also sharing some beautiful sentiments on how all this, the money doesn't matter, it's about the passion we put into it, and we're doing it because we love it. Also, I admire too the tasteful reference to infomercials, where I'm probably showing my age because I know what an infomercial is, and then ending it off while thanking his crew, his family, and saying if we want another series, they'll give it to us, which I think is good. Because regardless of what I think of this trilogy in particular, I will not deny that Nas is definitely a hardworking artist, and definitely one that deserves respect for putting together such a collection of albums in a very short amount of time. So yeah, overall I was kind of mixed on this. While there are great lyrics on here, some poor lyrics on here, some great hooks on here, some poor hooks on here, I feel like overall it's kind of a mixed bag for me. I do think Nas has the potential, as he's shown before with King's Disease, that he could be more consistent with putting out fire, but this was kind of disappointing due to how Magic 1 and Magic 2 just felt like holdovers until we get the final project or something bigger, and due to this being the last one, I'm left kind of wanting more. Yeah, overall I'm feeling a 3 out of 5 hearts on this. It wasn't bad, but definitely not one of my favorites of Nas's catalog. But that's just my opinion. If you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And that's it. Caspa, Gothic Ghost, Magic 3, Nas, Hit Boy, till we meet again.